How Bellas, Sophia Leva Marie here with Nurturing Divine Beauty, and I have the beautiful Veronica Monet from the Shame Free Zone, and we are here to have another foray into channeling your sacred rage. Today we're going to actually talk about the masculine perspective, and I want to thank Veronica for being here. Yes. We had such an amazing conversation last week about the feminine perspective. And even though the Me Too movement was so much about women and what they were feeling, there is balance. So it is also about the masculine perspective, which actually is even less heard than women because they're taught differently. Culture doesn't tell men to share. And it's not, and I put in quotes, the manly thing to do to talk about pain or what comes up. And that's what we're here to do, is to expose a light so that men can be heard as well. And Veronica and I are fortunate that besides the men in our personal lives, we get to work with men who have either had trauma themselves or they are facing with a partner what's coming up, or in today's world where the Me Too emotions are so up, they're not sure how to act. They're not sure what's actually appropriate to say or to believe or to act. And what are your thoughts on that? What's coming up for your clients and the men in your life? Uh, sorry, sorry to interrupt, but I actually got a post that we're actually not seeing or hearing you. I can see you, but the viewers actually aren't seeing you. We had technology concerns in the first class, so apparently we're going in the second one as well. Right? Why don't you try that? Uh, and that's what Kristen said as well. Okay. So Kristen is my amazing, amazing, amazing God sent virtual assistant, and she's helping us. So I'm sending a message because we have had difficulty with this third party medium for Facebook Live. So Veronica's going to come back in. All right, I see you.
Yes, my camera sees me too. And I wonder if anybody else can see me.
Let's see.
Oh, there! Look at that. I have appeared on Facebook as well. That's great.
There you go.
Okay. I think I just had to restart it.
Yes.
Good enough.
Excuse me.
So I was talking about male training.
Yes.
And I just actually see one of the things, I bring a special gift to my male clients. And that is the fact that I was raised kind of with a male script, if you will. Mm-hmm. My father didn't allow for much feminine behavior in our home. So we weren't allowed to cry, for instance, which was kind of ironic because the only person who cried then was him. It's kind of strange. But by the time I left my parents' home, I had to teach myself how to contact other emotions besides anger. And other ways of coping with issues besides logic. I was just very much, use your brain, be logical, don't be emotional. And it really cut me off from myself. And it was bad for my health. It was bad for my anger management too. I didn't have any anger management actually at a young age. What I had was a lot of rage. And I acted out. I acted out violently and largely self-destructively. I got way into alcohol and drugs as a very young adult. and so heavily into them that I was done by the age of 25 when I got clean and sober, and I had to learn how to connect with these other emotions that just had been trained out of me. And at some point, I realized, wow, I'm kind of male identified, and I would like to think that I have a holistic identification at this point, both masculine and feminine. And I certainly see a lot of things about me that are feminine. But I used to joke with my queer friends, and I'm queer identified because I'm bisexual. I used to joke with them that I am a butch and drag. So because I love clothes, I love makeup, I love shoes, but really my personality had a huge masculine overlay to it. So the interesting thing that I can do with my clients is I really get the male and the female perspective. So I work with couples, and there's this way in which I can help them see each other's perspective, and I don't see the obstacle actually to understanding both male and female perspective. It feels kind of arbitrary and silly to me because we're just human. But I've lived an inhabited space in both realms. So consequently, I've also had I don't know, it's an uncommon journey. More and more now, we're really starting to realize that both genders, or I would like to say all genders, are capable of perpetrating violence. And now when the police are called out on a domestic violence dispute, they're more likely to arrest both people regardless of their gender. But it used to be that we thought that men were the perpetrators and women are the victims. And there's a way in which I feel that Me Too has moved in that direction. And I find that disturbing because I am hearing from men about the ways in which they've been perpetrated against by women. And it's just not a conversation that I think the culture at large is quite ready to have. They're barely ready to have the conversation that men can be perpetrated against by men. That seems to be our next big hurdle, is just that men also suffer sexual assault and harassment. And a couple of famous examples that come to mind for me are Brendan Fraser, movie actor, and Terry Crews, former NFL player. They both came out, I think, very courageously about their Me Too moments. And in both instances, it was a man that perpetrated against them. And what I thought was incredibly brave about both of these men was the degree to which they were willing to claim their vulnerable trauma. It's new. It's rare to this culture for us to be having a discussion about men's pain when it comes to being sexually perpetrated. But we're more prepared to be able to digest that if it's a man perpetrating against a man. And, if the cynical part of me could say that that's because there's a little bit of homophobia in that, we're like, oh, of course you'd be upset by that. But the thing that I don't see us ready to do quite yet, and I really want to bring to the fore today, I want to start having that conversation, is that women can sexually perpetrate as well. Now, it may not be as common, and certainly there are some factors that I don't want to negate when it comes to how Me Too has largely been a movement for women by women. I understand that. I'm a feminist, and I'm a sexual abuse survivor. I'm a rape survivor. I'm a domestic violence survivor. I definitely had many Me Too moments, as most women have. And a couple of those, probably 3 or 4 of them actually, involved Hollywood. So their stories are my stories, and I relate very deeply to them. But I think that because I have so much interest and curiosity about finding out what are men's experiences, that men are starting to tell me about the ways in which they have sometimes been sexually harassed and or actually raped by women. And that goes against our cultural dogma or narrative in such an extreme way that it's really hard to get any traction on the topic even. People are like, oh, what? That could be. Men are bigger, men are stronger. Yeah, but, like a lot of women who get date raped, myself included, I was date raped on an alcohol-induced blackout. And the man who raped me was definitely a rapist, by the way, spent half his life in prison. Somebody's going to be perhaps more empathetic towards me about that than if I know about a man who was raped while he was on a blackout. So, and how does that even happen, you might wonder? I don't know that I want to go into all the technical details about it, but it is quite possible to rape a man. And the trauma that I'm hearing about, it just sounds very much like the trauma that a woman would have. So we have to get past this mythology that all men want all sex at all times. And that's, I think, really important for us to start moving to a direction where we realize, you know what? Not all guys want to have sex every time it's available to them. And that will start humanizing men. So we can start seeing them as people. Instead of, right now, they're either heroes, right? It's like respect and protect women and children, defend your country, or they're perpetrators. And we need to broaden our discourse about men, because men are people, first and foremost, and they have the same array of emotions and feelings that women do. As a matter of fact, it's so funny, Sophia. I spent 14 years as a high-end escort. People have always asked me, what did you learn about men? I go, basically, they're women. So, yeah.
And that's really what our conversation wanted to bring forward, is that the human aspect of emotions, not the separation of male and female. The experiences may be a little bit different. However, the same, as you say, the same perpetrations can happen, the same feelings, the same emotions. And for men especially, it's trained out of them. They're told as little boys, man up. As you said, you should protect your sister. You're the man of the family. Maybe they grow up in a single, with a single mother. They're raised to actually not have those feelings. So when we're asking them to have empathy for a woman who's had a perpetration, first, how could they feel it if they're not allowed to feel that first for themselves? How could they actually have it for someone else?
Exactly. I co-facilitated a men-only group. It's kind of interesting. Me and another woman, Melissa Mango, co-facilitated a support group that was for men only. I know, it's kind of ballsy. Two women doing a men's-only group. But it was really, really enlightening, because what happened was that men started telling their stories as perpetrators. That was the first thing. It is fascinating, because that could have been a group of women and it would have been just the reverse. The first stories that a group of women is going to tell me is the ways in which they have been perpetrated against. And oftentimes I have to help my female clients get to the point where they can see their perpetrations, because they're kind of oblivious to them. Well, with these men, it was just the reverse. They readily admitted their perpetrations. One admitted to date rape. The other one admitted to sexual harassment on the job, which led to the termination of his employment. And I was really struck with the courage of these men. But then, on the heels of that, as we dug deeper into the feelings, they started recounting being sexually abused as children, and one in particular who had not admitted to any perpetrations suddenly got clear on the fact that he had been molested as a child. And in the group, he didn't even realize it before. He'd always kind of just put it in this "oh well, shit happens" kind of category. So, and as we got in deeper in our couple hours that we spent together there, another man also shared about how his wife had brutalized him through domestic violence. So, I mean, she using knives and everything. It was really, really scary, and I got to see how the male conditioning is such that it is actually more manly to admit to perpetrations than to admit to having been perpetrated against. It fits the script better. At least if you have done something wrong, there's a way in which you're powerful. But if somebody has done something harmful to you, there's a couple of things that have to happen. One, you have to reconcile the fact that you're not always big and strong and capable of defending yourself. And two, you've got to process those emotions. You actually have to feel the emotional pain associated with that. And that can be very difficult if nobody's ever given you permission for that. If the only thing you ever heard was boys don't cry and man up, well, then what are you going to do with that?
Yes. So it's about reintroducing, or actually introducing perhaps for the first time, the idea that vulnerability is power, not in what happened, but in allowing yourself to express what happened to you, to feel those emotions, and to know that it doesn't make it you any less, whether you're male or female. Today we're talking about men, especially, as you said, they have this inculcation that it must be, the bigger person, the stronger person, that you asked for it, you're just supposed to take it, take one for the team, all these things that they hear. Yet as we're trying to unravel this, to shift consciousness, we also have to be willing to share that vulnerability, to hear the other side.
Yeah, and it's difficult enough for women. I work with rape survivors, and oftentimes the lament is, why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I try harder to get away? And if women are experiencing that, even when they know that they're actually smaller and physically weaker,
right,
it's difficult for a man if he envisions himself as being larger and physically stronger, to admit that somehow or another he has been bested. And when I say bested, that was really a poor choice of words. What I want to say is perpetrated against. I'll just stick with that term. It's very technical, but it seems best right now, so we can stay away from our assumptions. That fact that I even use that word is a kind of a masculine assumption. Somehow or another, I didn't prevail. So we need to understand more about the human brain and how it operates when we're being perpetrated against. And a lot of it's contextual too. It's like, if it's happening by being done by an employer, a friend, a relative, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a wife, a husband, we have kind of a place we can go into where we start accepting more and more abuse, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. And I always think about that frog in the boiling pot of water, right? the water's cold, he's fine. You warm up the water gradually, the frog never moves, and eventually he dies. Well, in some ways, when it comes to our human relationships, we have the same thing. We put up with a little bit, and we start normalizing that, and then we put up with a little bit more, and we normalize that, and oftentimes we're very quick to blame ourselves. The people around us might blame us and ask us to, start gaslighting us and telling us it's our issue, undermining our ability to even realize that what is happening is something unacceptable that we're not going to put up with. And if you grew up with abusive parents, and when I say abusive parents, I don't mean that they have to have been sexually abusing you or beating you. They could have just been verbally and emotionally abusive parents. And so that normalizes what happens in an interpersonal relationship. And if it was abusive, then you will normalize abusive relationships. Then there's another layer on top of that one. So you could call that background training, and our tendency to not want to lose connection with each other, so we start to endure things that are unacceptable. There's something else that happens in that moment of being assaulted, whether it's through domestic violence or through sexual assault, and that is that we get pushed back into our reptilian brain, which is like at the very base of the brain structure, and we call it the amygdala. We refer to it as the reptilian brain because it has very little ability to reason or form logical thought. And it has 4 responses. Oftentimes, most of us have heard about 3 responses, but there's a 4th one too. So the first is fight. Can I fight my way out of this? Mm-hmm. And the second one is flight. Maybe I could just run away. And then the third one is freeze. Freeze is somehow or another, I'll sustain the least amount of damage if I just don't do anything. And then the 4th one is fawning. And this is where you start to praise the perpetrator and try to somehow or another get on their good side so maybe they won't kill you or hurt you as bad. So those 4, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, happen to us pretty automatically when we are put under enough stress. And we've got to have some advanced skill sets to get out of that and be able to even access our prefrontal cortex so that we can have a logical thought on how we wanted to deal with a particular situation. This is why when I took self-defense training subsequent to having been raped, that we were reenacting the actual rape traumas, complete with the verbal abuse that came with them, so that we could teach our muscles to remember the self-defense techniques, because there's no way that our brain would be able to access that information on its own in the heat of the moment. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, most of us are going to be perpetrated against when we haven't had that kind of training. And we might not even employ it. I certainly know that in one of the rape situations that I was in, I logically chose to fawn. I knew that this guy was mentally unstable and that there was no way for me to flee. I was locked inside a building with no access to a key to get out. Fighting would have been ridiculous. The man had enormous biceps and he was like 3 times my weight. And phrasing would have meant that I might not get out of there at all. So fawning became a very intelligent coping mechanism at that point. But I had the advantage of not being pushed back into my amygdala at that time. And I chose one of those strategies as a way to survive, even though I had self-defense training. So, I mean, these are all things that we need to be more sensitive to. And if we encounter people who aren't sensitive to those things and we're a survivor, knowing about them ourselves in an intelligent manner can help us kind of educate people so that they don't undermine our recovery.
Yes. And you can rewrite I went into somatics. I really wanted to get into the body because when you have these traumas, as you said, you get sensitized. So, if you had an abusive parent, whether it was sexual or verbal or anything, it's locked in your body. And then there's a physical trauma that happens, then there's a sexual trauma, and it's literally locked in your body. But you can actually revisit the story in a safe way. And as you said, how would you react now that you have these options so you can revisit without re-engaging the trauma?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I look back on the 3 times that I was raped, the first time, there's a really good chance that I could have gotten away from the rapist, knowing what I know now. But because of my training as an incest survivor, that wasn't available to me at the tender age of 18. It wasn't available. So even if I can go back and think, what would I do differently? And it's valuable information for me because I want to be able to protect myself going forward. I think it's just so important that anybody who suffers sexual trauma make their number one priority having compassion for themselves, and really being that observer who is comforting you, cheering you on, understanding fully why you did or did not do what you did in that moment. So just that really establishes enormous safety, I think.
Yes.
And then that becomes kind of my bottom line if I'm speaking to somebody else about the sexual perpetrations that I have survived. I want them to also really be in my corner. If they're going to ask me questions like, why didn't you this or why didn't you that, the conversation is over.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And in extending that compassion to the men who have experienced these perpetrations themselves, and as we've talked about, it's even less talked about than even with women, Veronica has lovingly offered a perspective on how something we discussed last week is that when we've been traumatized, if it's not healed, we traumatize others. It just extends itself until the energy shifts or worse things happen. So, Veronica, why don't you tell us a little bit about how, until you were able to heal, the trauma you had actually led you to traumatize someone else?
Yeah. And I think, so to my knowledge, I haven't sexually perpetrated against another human being. I think there's times in my self-pleasuring when I might have been perpetrating against myself, but I don't believe that I have perpetrated against another human being. But notice the way I say that. I don't just say I never have, because I have my movie, my experience. And I've had a lot of sexual experience, so I don't know if there is somebody on this planet who felt perpetrated against by something that I did or said. And I would hope that I'm a safe person that they could come to if that's the case. I don't hold my perpetrations in a shame-based place. I actually have worked enormously to shift my patterns so that I don't perpetrate today. And I look at perpetration on a continuum too. I think there's emotional perpetration, verbal perpetration, and physical perpetration. So a lot of us do emotional and verbal perpetration at some time. And it's really important for us to clean up our act on that so that we can create a kinder, more loving planet for all of us. certainly when we cross the line physically and either inflict violence or sexual perpetration on another human being, it is incredibly serious, and it has long, far-reaching effects on the person who's been perpetrated against. And it also has long, far-reaching effects on the person who perpetrates. So, you know, there was a lot of talk about the shame that had been on women sexually over, frankly, millennia, being transferred to men now, which is where it belongs because they've perpetrated. And I understand the rage, you know, that fuels that. We talked about that quite a bit last week. But I just want to remind our viewers again that that is a really good way to sign up for more perpetrations in our culture, because we want to get away from shame. We want to make it safe for people to heal, regardless of whether they have been perpetrated against or they have committed the perpetration.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, I grew up my perpetrations were domestic violence perpetrations. And I grew up in a home where domestic violence was normalized. It was primarily my father who was abusing my mother, but really my mother also fought back. So I would say mostly she defended herself and always lost. His dad was bigger and stronger than her. But I do recall some instances where, out of her frustration, she put the whole family at risk. I can think of one instance that involved a firearm. And when I grew up and left home, I was bound and determined not to be a victim like my mother. So I also wanted to defend myself, but I did so more vociferously than she did. I did so with a lot more fury and rage than she did. And consequently, my first major relationship after college was just rife with domestic violence. The police were called at least once. I remember having 2 black eyes, a broken nose, and a busted lip one time. And it was pretty serious. I bled all the way through a pillow, a mattress, and the box spring of the bed. So I lost a lot of blood that night. And a lot of this was drug fueled. So when I got sober, I thought, okay, I won't have those issues anymore because I'm not doing drugs and I'm not hanging out with people who do drugs. And it wasn't until I got married, and I was 31 when I got married, that I realized, oh, even sober, I can have domestic violence issues. Now, my husband tried to choke me, and I did everything that I had been trained to do. By now, I had training in domestic violence and rape, and I've been a counselor for a Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence, and I'd gotten a lot of therapy and made a lot of progress. So I called the police. I filed a restraining order. I changed the locks to our apartment, and I found an organization called Men Overcoming Violence, and I said, you will get help. You will graduate from this program, or I'm filing for divorce. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And to my surprise, he did exactly that. He enrolled in the program. He lived in an apartment by himself for 6 months, and he got well. I mean, he actually recovered. His program was based on the men really reaching a place of contrition. And he was very committed to the recovery program. So we moved in back together, and I thought we were going to have a happily ever after. But what ended up happening was that I turned out to be a perpetrator now. There was some part of me that I felt like I didn't even know I had this thought, but I think I thought I'm going to get revenge at this jerk for all that he's done to me over the years. And he won't hit me back now. So, you know, it's open season. And at first I was just like really, I'd get in his face and yell and scream a lot. But eventually, something really weird happened. It was almost like I was so frustrated that I couldn't get him to hit me that I remember one time trying to hit him. I was beating him over the head viciously, hoping that he'd hit me. And he didn't, and he wouldn't. And that's when I finally realized I have a problem. And I looked for all kinds of programs. Now, this is back in the early 90s, and I couldn't find any programs that were for women. I found a 12-step program that was for women, but honestly, the women in that group sat around and laughed about how they were physically abusing their boyfriends and girlfriends. It was disgusting. But this was at the time that Thelma and Louise was a really popular movie. And in general, women were kind of having this we're going to get even experience. So I was right on time and in sync with the culture, but certainly off base when it came to my own personal recovery and the safety of my husband. I eventually got so frustrated that I could not get anybody to take me seriously as a domestic violence perpetrator, that everybody kept saying, oh, well, you're just defending yourself. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not defending myself. I'm perpetrating. That I did something you can't believe, probably. I asked my husband, who used to abuse me, for help. And I worked my way through his book from his program that was men only. And he basically sponsored me and mentored me through the whole damn thing. And one of the things that was really hard for me was when I created like a slippery slope thing. So like yelling and screaming becomes a slippery slope to doing other perpetrations. And so I was like, no throwing of objects, no slamming of doors, no storming out of the room. And those sort of things, if you start justifying those, it can lead to larger and larger perpetrations. And he, when I fall short of my goal of no yelling or screaming or name calling or slamming of doors, I would go immediately into shame and guilt and remorse. And the way that he helped me with this was to help me understand that the first thing I had to do whenever I perpetrated was go into a place of compassion towards myself, that I had to love myself back to being whole, that if I was going to be in a place of shame, then I was probably going to perpetrate again. And this was, it was a game changer for me. Being able to stop my perpetrations was absolutely, positively dependent on being able to have compassion for myself. And I am not suggesting that all the perpetrators on the planet just need our compassion. I'm celebrating the perpetrators who are going to jail to serve time for their perpetrations. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Golden State serial rapist who just got apprehended at the age of, I think he was 70, I'm not sure, but he's been apprehended because of DNA evidence. I'm glad somebody like that needs to be off the streets. But at the same time, we have to change our idea about how we're going to heal perpetrations. It can't be shame-based, because that just creates more perpetrations. Because shame leads to self-hatred, and when people hate themselves, they do some pretty horrible things, like, get a gun and kill a bunch of people and then themselves. So, and I'm not saying everybody handles it that way, but I am saying that we all internalize shame in a way that leads to hurting ourselves and others. Sophie, are you still there, hon?
So I wanted.
There you are. I was like, where did my partner go?
Listening and then responding, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, we didn't see you on Facebook, doll. Welcome back. So glad you're back.
Well, I want to really thank you for bringing forward that story because, as we've talked about, it's not heard. It's actually one of the least heard voices that need to come up about this. That's why when we put this together, it was channeling sacred rage for both. It was having the catalyst of the emotions in a way that healed both, because we don't actually want to take the Me Too movement where it's swinging the pendulum into vengeance and blame. And as we've been talking about, it goes into more perpetrations. So the women become the perpetrators, or society becomes the perpetrators against men because all of them do it. And I put that in quotes because that's not true. And it's really bringing forward whether a man has been perpetrated against or has been the perpetrator, if they're willing to heal, then that's where the compassion starts. First for themselves, and then allowing the divinity to come in. That no matter what has happened, no matter what you've done, that you are that innocent being, that innocent child of the divine. And that's often where men especially, they don't tap into that. That intuitive feminine part of themselves has been so, dumbed down, or just absolutely that's not correct for them to have, that they can't actually access that.
Yeah, that's true. I think that I really am wanting us to take this conversation from being gendered to being gender neutral. I don't think it does any of us any good to be thinking of domestic violence or sexual perpetrations strictly in terms of gender, because when we do that, we become blind to perpetrations and people who have been victimized who don't fit our gender script. So we're blind to the men who've been perpetrated against, and we're blind to the women who perpetrate. Well, we're missing a big part of the conversation. And it does help us stay stuck in the whole idea of shaming anybody who perpetrates. And I like to look at, like, domestic violence, I see that as a family disease. I see that as something that happens in families. And then we perpetuate that into our next families. And so if we look at it as a disease like that, instead of something like there's, these horrible perpetrators who are, abusing these innocent victims. And see, this is what becomes very difficult, because I absolutely believe that if I perpetrate, my victim is innocent. There's no way anybody can do or say anything that will cause me to perpetrate. That responsibility lies solely on my shoulders. I am the one who makes that choice. I'm the one who makes that decision. And at the same time, if I'm wanting to help a couple that has a domestic violence narrative in their home, I need to be sensitive to the fact that both people are probably perpetrating in ways that might not be immediately clear.
Yes.
And that does go back to the idea that it's a family disease. One of the statistics that I found very shocking early on when I was learning about domestic violence is about 70% of the women who go into domestic violence shelters actually beat their children. So it's like a family culture of violence. And unfortunately, the person who's smaller suffers the most. So the children suffer the most, and then usually the woman suffers the most. But that doesn't mean that men aren't also being brutalized.
Yes.
And I know we're talking about domestic violence, so I want to kind of bring this back to, what does this have to do with Me Too? you know, and I use that because it's an example that I'm really familiar with, in that whole idea of men as perpetrators and women as victims. But and it's more difficult for us because we don't have as many stories about women sexually perpetrating. I predict we will have a lot more of them in a few years. I think there's going to be more and more brave men who come forward and tell their Me Too stories. And at some point, we're going to start to realize, oh, guess what? There are women who have taken sexual liberties, made sexual demands, punished men because they didn't get the sexual attention that they wanted. But we haven't been noticing that or talking about it. And when we do that, I actually think that culturally we're going to be able to heal a lot better because we won't be polarizing this around gender. We'll just be looking at how certain behaviors impact human beings and the rights that all human beings, regardless of gender, have to their body, their space, to say no to sexual advances without suffering termination from employment, or without otherwise being punished. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Sophia?
Absolutely. And I think a common thread is that trauma has shifted abuse codes of what it looks like. It can be very overt, it can be subtle, it can be sexual, yet it needs to be addressed at the core level of what's happened to you first, of releasing it from your body, of releasing it from the patterns and your how you react or kind of populate your own life. And by addressing it, then it could change.
Yeah, yeah. I think if men are thinking of, if they're become more empathetic towards themselves, this like becomes the real challenge, I think. Mm-hmm. How do men experience more empathy towards themselves? Because if they can experience more empathy towards themselves, then they're also going to be able to have more empathy for other people. I mean, I think it's a big stretch to ask somebody who's been told to man up and not cry, and that didn't hurt, and if you don't like it, go punch them in the nose. If that's been your upbringing, and then for some reason, when something happens to the women in your life, we really have to be careful about their feelings. We have to be very, very careful that we don't frighten them. Mm-hmm. I think that can be very alienating. It's as if, okay, I'm not allowed to be human, but I have to treat this other population as if they're more human than me. Their feelings matter more than mine. And I really feel like that's kind of the message that we give boys. Girls' feelings matter more than yours. Mm-hmm. And I really want us to get away from the idea that men are supposed to serve and protect, and get them into a place where they can start experiencing empathy for themselves. Because if men are connected to themselves empathetically, we won't have to teach them how to have empathy for other people. Once you have empathy for yourself, it becomes rather automatic to have empathy for others. Now, if somebody is thinking immediately, oh, what about a narcissist? Well, that's not a person who has empathy for themselves. As a person who is trying to achieve certain objectives, some certain endpoint objectives by taking advantage of other people. And selfishness is not empathy for self. They don't have anything to do with each other. Selfishness is kind of a reaction against the disconnect. If you're disconnected from yourself, you don't feel empathy for yourself, so then you engage in selfish behaviors. Empathy, real empathy, if you actually feel your own pain, you'll feel other people's pains, and you'll actually probably be a lot more gentle, a lot more generous, a lot kinder. So, if we can take the conversation in that direction, where men are not getting demonized or asked to be a hero, but invited into their humanness, invited into their own bodies to have this full experience as a human being of pleasure and joy and of pain too. I think it takes enormous courage to feel your pain.
Yes. Yes. So that's invitation, is to, no matter what has happened or what has been done, to shine that awareness, that light, that compassion towards yourself. Because if you can't experience for yourself, you can't actually give it to anyone else. It doesn't compassion or love or anything. If you
More technical difficulties. You are frozen. Talking is the question, because I cannot see you, my dear Sophie. Well, I can see you, but you're frozen on the screen. You're very beautiful, Sophie. Oh, there! That brought you back. This new technology, I don't know what I think about this new technology.
Well, I'm not sure what you heard last. What I was saying, that if you can't have the compassion or the empathy, the self-love for yourself, whether you're a man or a woman, you can't actually have it for someone else. So that's to release the stereotype of perpetration or perpetrator. Actually take that off the table. And this experience you've had, and shine the compassion, and what are you willing to choose now? What are you willing to be now? What are you willing to receive now? What energies are you willing to actually have for yourself so that you can actually ripple that or to life or to your story? The availability for yourself allows you to be available for someone else.
Yes, absolutely. And, I want to offer our viewers a couple of anger management tools, because these tools actually help in any situation, even if you're not angry, but especially if you're angry. And that is, it's rather cliche, but taking a breath is so important, because the breath reconnects us to the body, and it reconnects us to our sense of the body. And when we get angry or frightened, then we get pushed back into the reptilian brain. A lot of times we don't actually know what's going on inside of ourselves. So when I was coming on the other side, of my perpetrations and really starting to get the hang of my anger management, I still had problems with road rage. This was an ongoing issue. It was very difficult. I had stopped being violent at home, but I'd take it out on the streets. And one of the things that I found really helpful was to take that breath and check in and see what is happening in my body. So I would notice that I was gripping the steering wheel really really hard. I would notice that maybe my jaw was clenched, that my breathing was no longer down inside of me. It was up in my chest and very shallow and quick. And the more curiosity I got, the more I could see that maybe, I actually I'm shaking. And I'm shaking because that guy cut me off in traffic. And a whole bunch of cars almost crashed. And so there for a minute, I thought I was going to have a car crash. And I wasn't just angry, I was actually terrified. And what was I terrified of? Well, I'm made of flesh and bone, and I'm traveling on this freeway in this fast-moving metal vehicle with a bunch of other fast-moving metal vehicles. I was actually afraid of dying. And for somebody who had masculine identification like myself, oh my God, what a humiliating moment that was. I was just like, no, I'm not afraid of dying. That guy's a jerk. It felt so much more powerful to judge somebody else. And in the past, I would have run down the road to honk my horn at him and give him a piece of my mind. But I didn't. I just sat with the feelings and realized I'm scared. That's why I got angry.
Right.
So to take that breath and then check in with the body. It's basically a 3-step process. You take the breath, you find out what's happening in your body. You look at your body, inventory it. Okay, I'm tense here, I'm relaxed there. I feel like I'm maybe going to go to the bathroom. I'm shaking, whatever's going on for you. And then the third step is to find some of the thoughts that are in your head. And a lot of times, if it's an interpersonal thing, the thought might be, well, that person hates me, or that person doesn't respect me, or other people are going to find out. There's any number of things that our script will run us into this place of being angry and potentially violent. And I do, by the way, have a very broad idea of violence. I actually think flipping somebody with a bird is an act of violence now. Come a long ways. So anyway, those 3 steps: take the breath, see what's happening in your body, and then check your thoughts. And if you find out what thoughts you tend to have, you can rewrite the script. So you've mentioned this several times, Sophia, about rewriting the script. And I actually got out a piece of paper and rewrote new things to say to myself when I was in certain situations where it was pretty predictable what thoughts I was going to have that were going to compel me to want to get angry and possibly perpetrate. I suspect that when we actually get honest about the Me Too perpetrations, that we're going to find that there were a lot of scripts going on there too. I think some of the scripts might have been, well, I deserve this, or she owes me. I know that when I'm thinking of one particular male survivor that I know of, when he told me his story about being sexually perpetrated by a group of women, I think the script that those women had going was all men want sex all the time. So even though he says no, he doesn't mean it. Mm-hmm. So finding our scripts would tell us an awful lot about why we have permission, why we've given ourselves permission to perpetrate.
Yes. Yes. And I'm feeling into it, and as you brought up connecting to the body, that is one of the places to release the trauma, because it is actually physically in your body. So if you're I'd actually lead through a brief releasing of what's actually been stored in this moment, because we've actually brought up some emotions, brought up some of the things that are actually been present, and they're up now, so let's actually release them.
That would be beautiful, Sophia. Lead away.
Right. So let's just close our eyes. And what do you do without feeling, whether it's pain, something, what sensation, more so, where are they in your body? And I feel lots of thoughts are running. So actually, let's spiral them. So if you see a beautiful diamond in the front of your head, let's allow the spiral into that. So anything in the very moment, anything that the anger, the rage, the sadness, the hurt, the despair, the not knowing what to do next. Just anything that's been brought up in this moment, Let's allow that diamond to spiral and bring that energy into that diamond. You can revisit the emotions if you like later. But I just would really love you to be present in this moment. Let's also place one in the heart for the emotions, the feelings that have come up, the true hurt in your heart, the love that you were not given, the love that you haven't given yourself. Let's draw that back into our heart. Let's ground our feet. So, as if your feet chakras could open and really allow yourself to feel the ground beneath you. You are being supported, you are being held. This is stable ground for you. And as we've talked about, these energies, these traumas, are literally held within your cells. So allow your 70 trillion cells to open as if they're windows or doors. And allow that energy just to flow out of your body through your feet chakra into the earth. And just have it be this simple that whatever is willing to move in this moment, whatever is willing to be released in this moment, can just pour out of you. You don't have to have a cognitive awareness of what it is or what needs to be released in this moment, but just what is ready to go in this very moment, just let it flow out. And I feel fire energy coming up. Fire is used for purification. And since we've really been talking about the male gender, even though we have gotten to the place where we're releasing the genders, since it has been brought up, that energy is there. So, really allowing fire, purification, this is divine fire, cannot hurt you, can only purify what is not true, what is not serving you. So, allow that fire to flow through your body. Energies in the heart, in the perineum, anus. Yes. Let it just flow out of you. Let it purify. Whether there was preparation you've received or that you've practiced yourself, just allow yourself to receive the purification. And as these systems are releasing, again, what does not serve you, just flowing into the earth to be transmuted into energy. Allow the void that's been created, that's been released, to be filled. So as if you could open the crown chakra at the top of your head and just allow the gift of the divine, the cosmos, to flow through you like a beautiful, thick, white, gold liquid. It coats each and every one of your cells with nourishment, with love, with compassion, with nurturing, with nourishment. And that wherever you've been feeling a hole in yourself, wherever there's been a void, let the divine fill you. Actually overflow your body with this divine blessing, allowing it to see you, not for the past, but the truth of who you are, your divinity, your innocence, your desire for a new moment, the vulnerability, the willingness to have and be compassion, the willingness to have and be love, the willingness to make.
Lost you, Sophia. Or Sophia. Oh, if only we didn't have these technical difficulties.
Yes. Okay, can you see me now? I see.
Oh, I can hear you now. Hello, welcome back. That was really, really special, but I don't think we finished.
Okay, so what was the last thing that you actually heard, Veronica?
Boy, I was in such a deep trance, I wouldn't be able to repeat it.
Okay, let me just tap in. So I feel with the light. So again, just noticing that each and every one of your 70 trillion cells is lighting up. Pure, bright, white, divine light. And it's not actually something that's given to you. It's actually who you are. It was buried underneath pain. It was buried underneath culture. It was buried underneath experiences. But by saying yes to this, by saying yes to the compassion, to the love, to the nurturing, you're actually saying yes to your divinity. And just allow yourself to receive that you actually are light. And think how powerful that is. You have 70 trillion cells. I believe the nucleus of each cell could power a city or a country. So if you have 70 trillion entities of light that make up who you are, what can be different in your experience? Would you be willing to have that compassion for yourself? Would you be willing to have compassion for others? Would you be willing to have that love for yourself and then reflect it out to others? And just knowing that, again, this is actually who you are. This light that you're experiencing, this has always been there. Nothing that has happened or nothing that has been done can actually diminish this light. Just basking in your own light for this moment. And then again, all of your cells are this pure light, as if you could turn them around, as if they're mirrors, and start to reflect that light out. Knowing that it doesn't diminish the light within you. It's still bold and beautiful, bright, divine light. But now you get to actually shine this out. And that can change your experience. It can change your reactions. It can change the reality that you see. And just know from this moment that you have access to this light. So when something comes up, allow yourself to have this, because this actually is true for you. You are divine. You are pure light. Again, it doesn't matter what's been done by someone else or yourself. There's nothing that can take away from this divinity, this light that you are. And then just again, turning your awareness to your feet to ground this energy, this truth. Allowing your cells to gently close. And actually just be this light. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you, Sophia.
Mm.
So delicious. I just am thinking about how I think this practice and practices like this are very much how you heal yourself from basically death's door.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. Body and spirit had to come together, and I had to learn first for myself, which, as we've talked about, it has to start with us, and then I could start to reflect that out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, powerful stuff, and it's not easy sometimes for us to be quiet and to sit with our deep feelings, and also to have this knowingness about ourselves. But we do need to know that we're sacred, that our feelings are sacred, and then learn ways to deal with those emotions and knowings that also create sacred acts, so that our behavior is hopefully steeped in sacredness as well.
Yes.
Sophia, do you have, we've been talking about sacred rage, the feminine perspective and the masculine perspective. Do you have anything to say about the word sacred? I did a live streaming yesterday and was asked what does it mean to me, the word holy? How do I live with that word holy? And I want to ask you something similar, which is, how do you live with the word sacred? What does it mean to you?
For me, it means what is absolutely true. So the difference between rage and sacred rage is that sacred rage brings out the truth, but in a way that doesn't hurt yourself or anyone else. So it's what's true. And that does mean what is divine, because your truth is what's present. And when you share from that aspect, when you share what's true for you, but in a way that doesn't harm either yourself or others, that is flowing through the world as your divinity, as your sacredness.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that you envision us as sacred beings, and then therefore our feelings, our emotions are sacred as well. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so can I ask another question?
Of course.
So what's the difference between something that's sacred and something that's not sacred? How would you distinguish between those two?
It's an interesting question. I would say something that's not sacred is, again, reflecting back to it's not true. It's true for someone else, or it's true according to the culture, or it's true according to what you're told, but it's actually not tapping into who you are. Your truth. And my truth can be completely different than anyone else's. But as individual sacred beings, we have our own truth and what's true for us. You know, as we talked about, like, we could have the same person can have the same experiences and have completely, or two people rather, can have the same experiences and experience it completely different ways. So what is actually aligned with your truth? I don't know that I actually believe that there's anything that's not sacred as long as you're aligned with your truth.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually believe that that's part of the path to always reaching for what's sacred, for always reaching for what's true for us, what's always reaching for growth, because I am hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't relate from someone else's perspective at some point in their life, or who can't actually identify with who they actually are. Like, they've been given an identity. So I find it hard pressed to find someone who's not that, but if you're reaching for it, maybe that's what makes it the sacred process, that you are willing to reach for your truth.
If I may, I have a, when we started talking about sacred rage, there was a particular paradigm that evoked for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I thought and think is that if I'm coming from a place of fear and resentment and shame, then whatever I think and feel and do is probably not going to actually be sacred. It's probably going to have darkness in it and be destructive.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about my sacred rage, I think about how I use that like a powerful wind to drive my sails and help me navigate the oceans of life, which is a lot different than just letting it tear apart my sails and sink my boat.
Mm-hmm.
The latter I wouldn't consider sacred, and the former I do. So in a lot of ways, it's about the intention.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer that I had yesterday about holy was very similar in that we set something aside as being sacred or holy, and then we don't use it for the mundane things. And if I look at my emotions as a sacred source of insight and ability to connect fully with myself, and as you say, discover my truth. Maybe my truth is that I'm going to have better boundaries. Maybe my truth is that I'm going to call out a perpetrator. Maybe my truth is that I'm going to take better care of myself, have more empathy for myself. Those things are all life-giving, life-affirming, and very positive upward energies. And if I was to simply look at a situation and say, that horrible human being did me dirt and now I'm going to get revenge,
right,
I probably would be full of a lot of rage, but I don't think there'd be anything sacred about that in that moment, because I would be indulging in resentment, bitterness, and probably some form of perpetration.
Mm-hmm.
How does that land for you?
It does. And I also have the perspective that every single thing, every single experience, every single choice we make or made puts us exactly where we need to be. I mean, whether it seems loving or happy or really shitty, it leads us to this. So I think, at least my personal perspective, is that it's always just the path of finding your truth, of more so being your truth. And it's always going to be a growth. It's always going to be an expansion. So kind of like the labels of sacred or not sacred or right or wrong. Maybe I have a little bit different perspective in that, and one that's actually changed, because I think I was actually very vengeful and very much about the eye for an eye years ago, before I had actually healed. I was all about that. Control, getting back at the person. Like, if
do tell. Sounds like you may have some perpetration stories of your own there, Sophia.
Yes. And it was, kind of like my idea of justice, and I put that in quotes. But again, that was from a fractured perspective. However, I actually required that fractured perspective to have the experiences to lead me to the healing, to lead me exactly where I needed to be for myself and for others.
Well, obviously, yeah. So you're accepting, not regretting. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. So, yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question. It's an interesting question that I'll have to play with, but I do actually think that we came here to experience everything. And as spiritual beings, that has both light and shadow. Mm-hmm. One doesn't have, a higher quality than another. It's a choice. It brings awareness, and then we can choose again. And we can tap into the growth, or we can choose to perpetuate it. And that is the experience.
Yeah, that's for me. I actually feel, having taken some dark paths and seeing that they can just spiral down into death and insanity. I don't see all paths as equal at all. And in fact, I think so much of what you and I have been trying to do at these 2 Facebook live streamings for the past 2 Saturdays is bringing in something that's steeped in and grounded in love and light and positive growth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And in order to have the light, you need the shadow, which is why we actually can bring forward that there does need to be a change, that compassion does need to come forward, that love does need to come forward, that the healing starts within. And we require to actually look at, are we going into separation, into segregation?
Mm-hmm.
Male, female, perpetrator, victim, all these things. But it's allowing it to come into wholeness when you look at all aspects of it.
Yeah. Well, I certainly believe we need to be more whole.
Yes. Well, any kind of final thoughts? I don't see any questions populating, but
I know. Maybe this time of day is not the best for people. I don't know, but I see some people actually logged in, so it would have been great if they'd asked us some questions. But final thoughts would be that if we can move away from speaking about people who have perpetrated as perpetrators, I think that might be a good first step. I don't know. I certainly identify as a former perpetrator myself, and I see some value in that. I think it helps inculcate in me a sense of responsibility and some somber feelings of wanting to make amends for the things that I've done in the past. And for me, making amends largely translates to a living amends, which is I don't do it anymore. And I don't do it anymore not because I resolved not to do it anymore, but because I actually got coaching, training, therapy, and all the other things that were attendant in helping me to shift patterns. So I want to say that regardless of what your gender is and what things you may have done that you think you shouldn't have done that you'd like to do differently in the past, I think it's really important to get help, even if that is just turning to an ex-husband who's mastered nonviolence when you haven't, which is what I did. It's important for us to not try to use our resolve and this whole pull you up by your own bootstraps mentality, because it just doesn't work. People don't actually, and those few people who are able to stop drinking without getting help, or stop abusing other people without getting any help, usually are kind of rigid and calcified, and it's not like my experience with them isn't that they've really found this ticket to joy and freedom, but rather that they're kind of what we call white knuckling their way through life, being very, very careful to avoid certain situations and stimuli so that they don't act out. And I don't think that's a good way to live. So, to have this openness and this humility to ask for help is a beautiful thing, because when you ask for help, you also experience yourself as part of the human tribe, and you can get some concrete advice from somebody who's already walked that path. So that certainly is what has worked for me in my journey. How about you, Sophia? What final thoughts do you have?
Really taking the awarenesses of Me Too was absolutely vital.
Yeah.
For everyone, no matter what the focus was, specifically on women, it needed to come out, and it's going to come out in varying degrees. So we're at an incline period. So there's the awareness now of it's out, it's up. And you can start to take a look at yourself. As you said, okay, am I actually creating some of these behaviors in whatever way, in whatever shade, whatever aspect? And start to look at what would I like to choose next. So the what next is actually deeply personal. It's what can I do to shift myself first? What energies can I be to be this change? Because when you take personal responsibility, then that ripples out. So I think the what next is for each person. What next? What can I do next? What can I look at personally next? What can I be willing to shift? Where can I go? As you were saying, there is help, whether it's with Veronica or I, or a million different places that you resonate with. You can find someone who has, as you said, walked this path, that we've had this experience. We help others go through this experience to be the change, and be willing to be open and willing to be the what next for yourself and for others.
Yeah, I like that. Be willing to be the what next for yourself and for others. It's a great capper to today's session, Sophia. We should put that on the title.
There you go. Yeah. Yes. So I want to thank you, everyone, for coming with us, whether it's live or whether you're watching the replay, and just for being open. I want to thank you, Veronica, for sharing this space with me. Yes, thank you. I think many other things will come down the pike.
Look forward to our next broadcast once you're in Italy.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm thinking not on BeLive.
You know what? I'm thinking I'm kind of over BeLive too. No offense.
Yeah.
This app needs a little more work. So
yes.
Maybe next time we'll do. I know some friends of mine do Zoom, and then they do Zoom on Facebook. So maybe we'll try that next time.
I like it. I like it. Perfetto.
Well, have a beautiful move to your new home. Post post a lot of pictures of Italy to make us all jealous, okay?
I will. I will. And again, thank you for showing up for both perspectives, you know, from bringing forward the masculine and bringing forth the perspective that we don't hear about, especially, you know, when the perpetrators have been the female.
Yeah.
So thank you for shining that light, and may it go forward, and may others begin to have this conversation and be the conversation, be that change.
May it be so.
May it be so. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will make the replay available. And thank you for being in this space. And we look forward to hearing from you on how you are going to be what next. Ciao for now.